If you recall, the other day I had talked about the concept and the philosophy of romanticism in English literature, and today I would survey the history of the romantic movement as it began in English literature in the late 18th century and early 19th century. I may tell you that literature is like a river. It has got so many waves flowing simultaneously. There are tides and ebbs. So, what actually happens is that one wave comes to the surface and it is named as a particular movement. Another wave goes down, sinks down, and then it is no more there. In the same way, the traits which we find in romantic poetry, they were already there in Elizabethan literature as well. But during the 18th century and the neoclassical period, those traits sank down and some other traits of classical poetry, they came up to the surface. In 1750s and onwards, those romantic traits which were there during the Elizabethan period, they started upping their head. And we have got a complete galaxy of pre-romantic poets. This galaxy includes writers and poets like Thomas Gray, Collins, Cowper, and then Chatterton, and then a few minor poets as well, like Blake. They were all pre-romantic poets. In their poetry, the dawn of romanticism was already there, but the actual romantic movement may be said to have begun with the publication of a book. In 1798, it was a collection of poems and it was called Lyrical Ballads. Lyrical Ballads was a collection of poems written by Wordsworth and Coleridge. It was a collection of 27 poems, in which 20 poems were by Wordsworth and 7 were by Coleridge. The collection was published anonymously without the names of the authors. And then the first poem of the collection was Tintern Abbey by Wordsworth, and the last poem of the collection was Rime of Ancient Mariner by S.T. Coleridge. When the first edition of Lyrical Ballads was brought out, it became so popular, the poems, they became so popular with the common readers and masses that in 1800, Wordsworth and Coleridge together, they thought of bringing out the second edition of the Lyrical Ballads, and this time they added their names. And then people came to know about the actual poets behind those poems, and in a passage of time, in a due course of time, the names of Wordsworth and Coleridge, they became very favorite and popular among the readers, among the masses, the people. Now, in 1802, the third edition of lyrical ballads, with certain more poems, a few more poems, plus a preface to the lyrical ballads that was brought out. And the preface to the lyrical ballads was written by Wordsworth. It is said that preface to the lyrical ballads is the Magna Carta of Romanticism. In that preface to lyrical ballads, Wordsworth, in a way, launched the romantic movement in English literature, and he said certain altogether new things, novel things in that preface about poetry, about poetic diction, about poetic process. So many things, so many ideas, they were raised, and it became one of the best reads of the time, because he was a poet cum critic who came out with a different theory about poetry, different theory about poetic process, and a different theory about poetic diction. And therefore, the preface to the lyrical ballads is regarded as the Magna Carta of Romanticism. In the preface to lyrical ballads, Wordsworth for the first time defined poetry, basing poetry on emotions and the expression of emotions. He said, poetry is a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. And he defined poetry as the expression of emotions, as the expression of feelings, which are gathered in the heart of a poet, and when they come up to the brim, they start overflowing, and that overflow is spontaneous overflow. Wordsworth points out a spontaneous overflow is expressed in the form of verse, and that form of verse is called poetry. Now, this is how he defines what poetry is. And the second very popular quote from Wordsworth is that poetry is emotions recollected in tranquility. When Wordsworth said, he gave this dictum, actually he was talking about how poetry is, or what a poetic process is. So, when he said that poetry is emotions recollected in tranquility, he simply means to say that when we experience something beautiful, when we have got some experience, that experience is perceived in our mind, it brings about a kind of sensation in our heart and soul and mind, and then that sensation is mixed up with some memory or desire, and then it is expressed in the form of a poem. So he is talking basically about the poetic process. And for the first time in English literature, right from Sir Philip Sidney, from Dryden, from Alexander Pope, Dr. Johnson, to Wordsworth, Wordsworth was the first poet cum critic who laid down or who explained the poetic process of a poet, that how a poem is written, It is a recollection of emotions, emotions which are revived, which are aroused in the mind when the mind is at peace, is tranquil, right? Because somewhere of us seem to believe that there cannot be any song in times of revolution. This is something which he shares with the French critic Jacques Barzun, who had the same idea, same opinion about revolution, about writing poetry in times of revolution. So Wordsworth believed that when we are experiencing something, we cannot compose a poem. We will have to come back and relive the same experience in our mind, and only then we can compose a poem when our mind is at peace, when we are quiet and silent, and we recollect that particular experience. Then emotions are aroused, and those emotions are best expressed in poetry. Thank you very much. This is my lecture for today. Tomorrow I will be talking about what was said about poetic diction. Thank you.